Hello athletes, Travis here, back with another little training talk. Today we are going to be covering something that I think is very important for athletes in the rowing community and any other athletic community for that matter to consider. And this is something that I encounter nearly every time I pick up a new remote coaching client, is this idea of steady state being your easy days. And so this is particularly prevalent, in any kind of like cookie cutter training program that you're going to find online, or programs that maybe US Rowing or World Rowing is going to spit out, or P Plan, which people love, is essentially plans that set up your microcycle being your weekly plan, where you're alternating between higher intensity workouts, generally going to be AT, transport, maybe lactate workouts depending on what time of the year you're in, and you're going to alternate those with steady state workouts and basically stagger your week and your days between the two, maybe with a day off, maybe not with a day off. The problem with that is that it assumes that steady state is your easy day, is your recovery day, and that's a problem. That's problematic, because steady state is not recovery. Steady state is work. You're stressing, you're loading the body. You're simply loading an aerobic energy system rather than an anaerobic energy system. All right, and so this partly goes into what a lot of my videos are talking about: zone 2 steady state versus UT2, or zone 2 training, or heart rate based training. These kind of popular conception that training at this conversational pace for long volumes is important, which it is for the vast majority of endurance sports, but those endurance sports are muscular endurance sports and not power endurance sports. And so rowing has different requirements for the body, and you need to use your time in a different fashion. And it makes me chuckle to some degree, though sometimes it's just like hearing nails on a chalkboard when people try to defend zone 2 training, saying that, well, you can complement the loss of strength by training in zone 2 by adding in lifting sessions. And my point would be, not everyone has the time for that, and I think there's also a popular misconception when people are responding to the content that I'm putting out, is a lot of people will say, well, Travis is just used to dealing with, pre-elite, elite athletes, which is so far from the truth, it's absurd. The majority of athletes that I work with in my career are probably average age 16, so average high school, maybe older middle school athletes, and kind of high 40s, early 50s adult athletes, all right, with a little bit of standard deviation from those averages, because that's what you got to do to be a professional coach, unless you're working within a collegiate program, in which case you have a very narrow range of athlete ages. If you want to earn a living in coaching, you don't spend your time coaching elite athletes. They don't pay. I'll chuckle every time an elite athlete comes to me and they want a bunch of help, but they don't want to pay for it. They think they're kind of entitled to it just because they're high-performing athletes. Unfortunately, I've got bills to pay. So the majority of my work is done with what I would consider the average athlete. The average high school kid, the average adult, post early or young kids, post establishing a career so that are comfortable enough to dive back into training. And so I don't want people listening to these videos kind of dismissing any of the content, assuming that it's not for them. The content that I'm putting out and the discussions that I have should be relevant to 98% of the people out there. What changes is things like the volume, the frequency of loading, things like that. And those are the things that you actually need a coach to give you insight on. And so the principles are universal. How you apply those principles is particular to you. So that being said, we're going into this idea that steady state is your easy day. Steady state is not your easy day. Steady state is work. Steady state is stressing the aerobic system, all right, either a high stress or a moderate stress, and inducing that system to make an adaptation, all right? And so whether you're inducing your aerobic energy system to make an adaptation, or whether you're inducing your anaerobic energy systems to make an adaptation, you are still stressing the body. And so all these programs that spit out these weekly training plans, where it may be Monday steady state, Tuesday AT, Wednesday steady state, Thursday transport, Friday, steady state, Saturday, UT1, Sunday, off. You know, something like that, which is extremely ubiquitous in these kind of cookie cutter programs that people put out there, or even programs that people recommend, or even programs that coaches implement, because most coaches don't have an in-depth understanding of training methodology. Those programs are essentially a 6-day loading pattern, all right? You're just changing the energy system that you're loading. And the body doesn't work that way. Like, granted, a high-performing athlete, you know, maybe a very high-level college athlete or a pre-elite athlete, and certainly an elite athlete, you may be able to stress them at that level, but I would argue that you shouldn't. You know, that you should never put more than 2 or 3 consistent loading days on an athlete before giving them a distinct day to adapt to that loading, to adapt to that training stimulus. And you do that by giving a day that is active, but is distinctly not a load on the body, all right? That your rest days are rest, all right? Doing 60 minutes of steady state is not rest, certainly not if you're doing it right. Maybe if you think that zone 2 and low heart rate training is the answer for steady state and rowing, then maybe you could get away with that. But I would also say one of the big problems with zone 2 training and that low heart rate steady state is it requires a lot of volume. All right, and doing UT2 steady state does not require that kind of volume, all right, because its training stimulus is more isolated within a condensed effort, all right, whereas zone 2, and low heart rate training just requires massive amounts of volume. And I wouldn't recommend zone 2 training to anybody that's averaging less than probably 80 minutes per session, averaging, all right? That means that they're doing sessions that are over 2 hours, and they're rarely ever doing a session that's under 60 minutes, all right? Maybe for those athletes, they could get some benefit from zone 2 training if they're complementing all that training with focused strength work. But 99% of us don't have time for that, all right? And so I'm not coaching to the 1%. I'm not talking to the 1%. I'm talking to the 99% that have real responsibilities, you know, that aren't in school, and have jobs and have children and need to balance our athletics, you know, and our athletic activities with those other responsibilities, all right? We don't have time to sit out and go, you know, averaging 90 minutes of rowing per session, all right? That's not realistic, and I don't want to direct videos to such a small population of people, all right? But those are the people who might benefit from zone 2 training, all right? Because zone 2 training is effective at training the body to metabolize fat as an energy source, and fat is the most effective energy source in the body because it produces energy far greater proportions per unit of mass than carbohydrates do. But we're real people and we don't have that luxury. And so zone UT2 training, even if you were doing zone 2 training, you're doing a 90-minute zone 2 session. The point of doing that zone 2 session is to do it in a sufficient volume to stress the aerobic system. So you would still need to recover from that effort. You would still need a day where you're just moving and you're not stressing. You're either cutting the volume down significantly so that it's not enough to induce a training stimulus, or you're bringing the intensity down, all right? And if you're doing what most people do, maybe averaging 30 minutes per session, all right, even if you're averaging 60 minutes per session, all right, if you're doing steady state, if you're doing UT2 steady state, and even if you're really fit, and that UT2 is a session where you can finish, you've gotten good work, you can get up, you feel fine after 30 seconds, you can walk around, you have still produced a training volume or a training stimulus. You've still stressed the body. You've still stressed the aerobic system. That is the entire point of why you just sat down and did steady state. And whenever you stress, you need to recover, all right? Because people need to understand that the work that you're doing, all right, is not what makes you faster, all right? The work is a signal that you're sending to your body that it needs to adapt. And then it is the time between those signals that your body is actually making that adaptation, that is when you're getting better. And if you're consistently stressing the body, there's still time between sessions, all right? There's still time where your body is adapting, but it's always kind of behind the 8 ball. It's always playing catch up with that adaptation because you're continually sending it the signal that it needs to adapt without giving it the time that it needs to make that adaptation. All right, it's like a coach, like there's tons of bad coaches out there that they just can't shut up in the coaching launch. You know, they'll give an athlete some technical feedback, and then they'll drill and drill and drill and talk and coach that thing. And then as soon as they start to see that thing improve, they move right on to the next thing, all right? And then all of a sudden, everything that they work on gets lost, all right? Because they never gave that athlete time to incorporate the changes, the technical changes in the sense that they just put all that work into developing. Same thing with your body, all right? So that athlete in the technical sense may transfer 10, 20% of those changes to their normal stroke, but they're not going to transfer 100% of the changes. And it's the same thing if you're constantly loading your system by, you know, anaerobic work, anaerobic pieces, you know, steady state, anaerobic pieces, steady state, UT1 steady state, UT2 steady state, do pieces, take one day off a week. Just to survive that system, your body is always kind of just getting 10, 20, 30% of the benefit of that training stimulus and that signal to adapt to the load that you're putting on it. Whereas if you have a very distinct loading and unloading days, and how you kind of balance those two is up to the athlete. It might be for every loading day, you might need 2 unloading days. You might need 1 unloading day. You might be able to get 2 days where you're stressing the body for only 1 unloading day. And maybe if you're a top level elite athlete, you might be fit enough where you can go 3 days of consistently loading the body and only need 1 day to effectively incorporate all that stress, all right? That is way out in the outliers, all right? We're talking about fractional percent of the population who could successfully use that kind of training pattern, that loading pattern, and be successful with it. The vast majority of people are going to need 2, maybe even 3 unloading days for every loading session. And when I say the vast majority of people, I'm talking about the general population, all right? The average athletic population can probably get away with loading and unloading, all right? And maybe as you're getting to a high performance, maybe like, you know, experienced varsity level high school athletes or a veteran college athlete who's been rowing in high school and has a couple years of college rowing, that athlete might be okay doing 2 loading days and then only 1 unloading day, all right? But in all those cases, what are you doing on your unloading day? Well, what you're not doing is enough volume or enough intensity to stress the body, all right? And so I would call it activity without effort, all right? And so that may be a very comfortable bike ride, maybe a very light paddle if you're rowing. You know, we're talking 12, 10 maybe seconds slower than your normal UT2 at a rate that's maybe 1 or 2 beats lower than your UT2 and a drag factor that's lower than your UT2. You may be able, that'll be called your recovery, all right? A walk on the trail, you know, a very slow jog, you know, at a zone 2 heart rate, at a low heart rate, at a very comfortable conversational pace, and a relatively low volume, all right? Those can be considered your unloading days, your recovery days from your loading sessions. Whether that loading session is a 60-minute UT2, 30-minute UT1, you know, 5 by 3 minutes or 6 by 3 minutes of transport, or 3 by 3K, whatever, you know, your preferences are for those loading sessions, AT, transport, UT1, UT2, if you are doing those in the volume necessary to improve those energy zones. If you're doing enough UT2 volume to tell your body that it needs to get better at doing UT2, if you're doing enough UT1 volume to tell your body it needs to be getting better at doing UT1, same thing with transport, same thing with AT. You are stressing the body and you need to give the body time to regenerate and recover. And so that is what I hope you take away from this. Is like, I've had so many athletes, including pre-elite level athletes with many national championships already under their belt, where I've been able to take those athletes and decrease the training load on them by increasing the amount of easy days that they're doing and improve their overall performance. And granted, you do want to also put more focus on the quality of those loading days, because you do want to ensure that you're getting a quality training stimulus, but you've got to balance those out with your easy days, with your recovery days, days where you're just getting out and moving and your movement is pleasant. It is not stressful. You're not training necessarily on those days. You are recovering. And so if you're having trouble with your training and you feel burned out, you feel like you're not sharp on your sessions, you feel like you're carrying a lot of residual fatigue, from one session to the next, and you're just not seeing improvements in your training, well, one, I would say take a couple weeks off, and then when you get back into it, use recovery days between your training days, all right? And I would say for anybody, you could start off, load a day, do UT2, your UT1, your transport, your AT, whatever it may be, and then take a day where you're just moving, all right? Pleasant motion, getting your body going, at least 20 minutes, 40 minutes is great if you're really fit. If you're used to doing 60 minutes at a time, 40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes is great for that comfortable motion, and see what happens. I think that you'll find that training will be far more enjoyable, far more rewarding, and most importantly, far more effective than it was when you're just loading, and just changing the energy system that you happen to be loading and alternate between anaerobic and aerobic. So I hope this helps you guys. I hope you can incorporate this effectively into your training. I hope that you can realize that your plateaus in training aren't a result of your lackluster effort, your lackluster commitment. It's just lackluster planning, all right? And so give the body time to adapt to the stimulus that you're putting on it, that training stimulus. Give the body time, all right? Don't be afraid of resting. Don't be afraid of taking it easy, all right? Training effectively is about quality, not just quantity, all right? And then as you have quality, you can improve the quantity of that quality, all right? But improving the quantity of shit training, all right, and training where you're not giving yourself time to recover is only going to lead to bad things. Burnout, injury, lack of motivation. It's no good, all right? And that's the worst thing you can have as an athlete that's committed to something and that loves something, is to experience, those demotivators. So that's it for this video. I hope this helped. Throw comments down below, ask questions. If you want help with your training, reach out to me at gtsrowing.com. I do a lot of remote coaching with athletes. And otherwise, you can support the channel also on Patreon, Travis Gardner on Patreon, and throw a couple bucks to help me make more content like this and to help athletes in the community get more out of their training. Thanks for listening. This is Travis signing off. Bye.